The talk tonight, the other fellow, in presenting this subject, we are going to step out of character, forget we and who we are, and what we are, and step to one side and view the other fellow that we know, to look, study, and dig deep, and explain him to you, what he has done and why, and how he made a success of ventures, so you may know him as we know him. Unless you bear this in mind throughout, what we say as we say it, it will be egotistical and bombastic, and perhaps boastful, because this other fellow has thought much, said much, written much, printed much, and done much. He's accomplished much, and to exploit his deeds to you is to enlarge him before your minds. We have, however, one ultimate objective: to help create the same objectives in you. As we unfold our modest, immodest tale, be patient and considerate as we describe the deeds of this other fellow, that you might know how to duplicate what he has done as he has done it. The other fellow in this story is Innate. Innate was always crowding and pushing me, the little fellow, into doing things. It was fitting and proper that I, the little fellow, give the other fellow, Innate, credit for doing all that the little fellow would like to take credit for but can't. That's the moral of this story. Now, the other fellow has been a builder all his life. But let us ask ourselves this question. Many chiropractors hold the concept that patients want, demand, and pay for time spent on them. Much followed around. A lot of useless unnecessities. They think that is the way to get their money's worth. You think that is the way to satisfy their greeds. You overlook that that is exactly why they are chronically sick, why they came to you. They have had so much followed around that has failed to get them well. You cannot conceive that patients could be or would be satisfied with one adjustment, one place, one day, once, staying week after week with nothing more done. The opposite is true in the other fellow's clinic. Because of our educational program, they know that when they do not need another adjustment, it is holding, that the mental impulse supply is getting through, and they are getting well longer and faster. If they need so-called frequent adjustments, they are not getting well quickly. Actually, we have cases who break down and cry when they need another adjustment. Whatever we do that you don't do is queer. Queer, isn't it? This clinic is equipped to secure detailed recorded data on both medical and chiropractic sides of cases, both in sickness when patient enters, the restoration of health in the process of getting well, and the proof of that fact when dismissed. It is manned by the largest group of the longest years of experienced chiropractors. It is kept spotlessly clean in all departments. Each piece of linen is used but once. A short time ago, several physicians went through this clinic, and at the end of the tour said to Miss Howard, "You have a most marvelous clinic, marvelous equipment, the best there is. But what a pity you don't use any of it." Miss Howard said, "But why do you make that statement when we are using it, all of it, every day?" And they said, "If you used it, there would be finger marks on the equipment." We saw no finger marks. Miss Howard said, "That's the finest compliment you could give us, to know that we are using it all the time and you can't find any finger marks." It is the only clinic of its kind in the world where mankind has dared to compile, break down, and publish statistics on varied types of worst cases as to what it does, where it does it, how it does it, and what results have or have not been attained, whether the patient has or has not received that for which he came. These compilations have been and are being published in book form for public and professional consumption. Each phase of the work has its separate study in a separate book. More than 5,000 cases constituted these studies. And all this is proving whether we're right or wrong in our conclusions of facts. In designing and laying out our floor plans for this clinic, this other fellow suggested and insisted that there be a clinic assembly hall. He knew the argument that it was an overhead not conducive to producing income, but this, as also with the silent restrooms, theoretically different. It must be a large room capable of seating 200. It must be comfortably equipped for sick people to lounge and relax in, with big, easy, overstuffed chairs, chaise lounges, room for ambulance cots and wheelchairs, and a raised platform for the speaker, so that those lying down could see without straining their necks and could hear without effort. Music quiets the tired, jagged nerves, for music hath charms to soothe the savage breast. Install a Hammond organ, recitals daily, a Novacord, the Steinway concert grand that once belonged to Paderewski. As a party musical set up as a set of chimes. And this also produced the soft, peaceful, and restful coloring effect to the eyes. What was it Dr. Hender said this morning? I was one of the greatest psychologists in the world. Maybe he's got something there. Now you will ask the question, why a clinic assembly hall? So that there could be and would be weekly assemblies of patients, their nurses, parents, children, staff members, interns. Why? So that they might appear and talk to these people by the staff members on the clinic on various phases of our work, what this clinic stands for, what it is endeavoring to do and is doing, explaining its methods and the whys and the wherefores, explaining chiropractic, its principles and its practices, why we did this and not that, why we do not permit cases to take drugs, what our equipment does, and why we want patients to have this information. In fact, 1,000 things are explained week after week. To what end? To educate patients to chiropractic, to make them understand as much about chiropractic as we do, to send them forth as walking, talking delegates, disciples of our gospel to the outside ignorant world. We want them to help us increase the circle of our understanding into their understanding. Whenever this other fellow speaks, all come to listen and to hear and to know what he knows. And thus we build it up week after week. I mention this merely to show you why we built that assembly hall. Now, where does this lead us? What are we trying to tell you to do? Once a week, we invite the patients and the friends, well and sick, to your office. Set a definite hour in the evening for your talk. Start on time. Being exact in starting on time also proves you are exacting in your professional tactics. This honor fellow sets an hour for his talks. He starts on the 2nd. If people are late, that's their fault. When he attends a convention and an hour is set, he demands his time. Not later, but then. People soon become educated to know he starts on time, regardless. Knowing this, they are on time. Deliver your talk firmly, frankly, truthfully, with sincerity, believing what you tell. They absorb that unspoken, undelivered honesty of purpose. Don't take adjustments and deliver treatments. Don't talk innate digestion and sell vitamin pills. Don't talk adjustments for constipation and give colonic, backdoor, heavy irrigations. Don't follow the lead. Don't follow the lead of some who glibly talk about chiropractic being the greatest thing, and then lead patients a merry chase 40 times in 57 ways all around Robin Hood's barn in the neuropathic medicine. Following week, invite them again, and to bring somebody else who is sick. Soon your office will be too small. Get more room and more chairs. Someday you'll need a hall. Someday that will grow until you'll need an auditorium. Someday you will grow from the weakling that thought he couldn't speak until you will become a masterful disciple of a cause of rebuilding the human race. In talking more, you think more, getting deeper and deeper into your issues, developing and finding yourself as one virile element in a great international movement. Everybody else who has climbed the heights to the blue horizon yonder did it just that way. I once asked William Jennings Bryan, who was a guest at our home for dinner, whether he ever felt qualms before speaking. He says, yes, many a time. I've had to go to the bathroom just before I begin to speak. I was so nervous. And I said, but you are an experienced speaker. He said, every experienced speaker goes through that very thing. Now, ideas grow. They enlarge, become deeper, and you become conscious of a greater understanding within yourself. For after all, the greatest student is the teacher. The greatest speaker is the speaker himself. Help others and you help yourself. One of the slabs inside says, the love you give away is the love you keep. To get rich, spend money wisely. The other fellow recalls Dr. Wisher of Wisconsin. We were speaking before a convention at La Crosse. We were walking from the hotel to the meeting place at the YMCA. Wisher suddenly said to this other fellow, I am the first and only person to discover and to know what chiropractic is. You never knew. Looking at me, I propose to open a school and teach this great idea. We asked him what it was he had discovered. He then said, a vertebral subluxation is caused by a concussion of forces which occludes an opening between vertebrae, which produces pressure upon nerves, which interferes with a normal quantity flow of mental impulse supply between innate in the brain and function in the body. And this is the cause of all disease. He went on to say, there is only one way to get sick people well, and that is to adjust the vertebral subluxation, letting innate do the work of restoration. We looked at him surprised. Here was a chiropractor, supposedly, who was a PhD graduate 15 years previous. He had been supposedly practicing chiropractic. And he had just found himself. We told him frankly and brutally that he had discovered nothing, that we've been teaching those ideas 40 years. He sat in our classes, graduated, practiced, and did not know or understand what he was doing. We have wondered many times since, was it our fault? He did not get the idea. Was it his fault? He did not absorb what we were teaching. That we had been preaching that idea was obvious. Was there something else we should have done to get him to know what we knew? When he took the wind out of his sails, he was one of the worst crestfallen individuals we have known. It took him 15 years to begin, to get ready, to commence, to understand what we have taught all our lives. If Dr. Wisher could have concentrated thought, studied, applied himself, and worked while at school, he could have saved 15 years of wasted misunderstanding and working ignorantly. All the time he was in school, he was merely listening to and reciting words, passing exams which he memorized without understanding, securing a diploma for something which was a foreign subject, not knowing what the shooting was all about. For 15 years, he punched back bones according to formula without knowing why. Eventually, after 15 years wandering like a blind man with a red-painted cane, he thought he had found the secret none other had ever discovered. It was new to Wisher. It was old to us. Now, many another so-called chiropractor is in the same dilemma. We've always had them. They could be in school 10 years and not know more when they leave than when they entered. Others grasp fundamentals and have them even before they come to school, or at least they grasp them in a few days. That's why this other fellow has often made the statement, give us a straight-line thinker, and he can become a chiropractor in short order. But he'll have to think more to understand what he's getting. No. For it's another classic in our history. Mori was Japanese, one of our early students. He held a degree of Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Tokyo. He sat in our classes day after day, week after week, when our courses were shorter than they are now. The daily expression of his face indicated the humdrum that chiropractic was overrated. There wasn't anything to it as we claimed. He fussed and he fidgeted. He told us brutally he was wasting valuable time. We struggled in vain to liberate his mind from his past psychological prejudices. At last he decided to quit. No use chasing good money after useless ideas. Was he undereducated in right ideas? Was he overeducated to wrong ideas? Did he know too many things not so? Was chiropractic too simple for his complex mind? It was in the year the UCA was formed, 13 of us. We closed the convention sessions by hiring the grandpa to take us to Linwood, 8 miles down the Mississippi, where we held an all-day picnic. Shikitaro thought all of us were cracked, off in the upper story, nobody home any of the time. He brought along his fishing pole. He left the crowd so he'd get away from these crackpots to be in good company with himself. He went down the river a ways, within seeing distance, sat on a boulder in immaculate white suit, put on bait and waited for the fish to bite. This other fellow felt sorry for Shikitaro because he couldn't see what we saw, couldn't understand what we understood. We stood to one side watching him. His face was a mile long. His pole would drop in the water while he meditated about the shortcomings of imbecilities of the white race that lived on top of Brady Hill. His head would drop on his chest. If ever there was a dejected, forlorn, discouraged, and disconsolate person, he was it personified. After trying for 2.5 hours to catch one of those Mississippi mudcats, he suddenly jumped up on the rock, dancing, yelling, and screaming like a wild Indian on the warpath. We thought he had gone berserk. We rushed to his rescue, thinking he might drown himself. Then he told this odd story. Suddenly, I woke up. I was trying to readjust myself in relation to what was being taught here. I seemingly couldn't piece together today's crazy quilt of ideas with what I thought I formerly knew. I had to fight the conclusion that I either had to be everything I was before I came here, or I had to dump all of it overboard and adopt everything taught here. The fight was, which had to go. All of a sudden, as I looked out over the river, there came a brilliant bolt of light that rapidly came towards me from across the river, growing larger and larger and more brilliant as it approached, until it finally hit me all of a sudden with the rapidity of a skyrocket going off. It hit like a bolt of lightning. I suddenly grasped what it was. It was then I found myself. It is now as clear as day. I am the happiest man alive. What was it that awakened Shigataro Morikyo from his lethargy? What is it that awakens men sometimes? Who knows how far-reaching something we may think, say, or do today will affect the lives of millions tomorrow. And thereby hangs an interesting tale when I listen to Margie play the organ. When I was a boy of 14, I was studying pipe organ over at Augustana College. And I used to go to the Episcopal Church that was down where the Masonic Temple is now, and practiced from 4 to 6 in the morning and went to work in the department store at 7. One time, the great concert pipe organist Clarence Eddy came to town to dedicate the organ at the First Baptist Church. I had dedicated my life to music, and I wanted to sit at the feet of the Master. So I was the first one in the church. I sat as close to Clarence Eddy as I could get. I wanted to bask. I wanted to absorb what he radiated by way of music. After it was over, I asked him to come down to the home and we had dinner. And then, a little later on, I got into the radio business and we put in an organ in my home, a gorgeous pipe organ. 20 years later, Clarence Eddy again returned to town to dedicate an organ at the First Methodist Church. And I invited him down to broadcast from that organ. When he came in, I said, Mr. Eddy, for 20 years, you have been entertaining millions of people on the air. No, he said, there's a mistake. I just arrived in town this morning, and I said, no, Mr. Eddy. It was you that put this organ in my home. It is you that has constantly been playing at this organ, entertaining millions of people. It is you again here today, Mr. Eddy. He broke down and he cried and he said, isn't it wonderful to think that something I did 20 years ago is entertaining people for 20 years. We never know how far-reaching something we may think, say, or do today will affect the lives of millions tomorrow. The tendency of all of us is to minimize the importance of ourselves in relation to the great work with which we associate. But let me tell you a little story. One day, one of our students about to graduate came over to the house and said, B.J., I want you to move your school to New York City. That's the hub of the universe. That's the brains of the world. That's the money center of the world. Bring your school over there, and in 10 years you can retire many times a millionaire. And I said, well, I'll have to have a business manager. Well, he said, I'll take the job. I found out later he'd been a clerk in a Wall Street broker's office at $15 a week. He said, I'll take the job. And I said, all right, you are now my business manager. It'll cost me $100,000 to move to New York. Now you go out and get the $100,000. And he said, but that's your job. I thought it would be. He was business manager. Later that boy went to New York and opened an office on 34th and Broadway. One day, in a complete drunken stupor, a patient came into his office. He laid her down across the two-bench divided table, which we used in those days. And in his drunken stupor, he lunged into that lumbar region, fractured her back, and she lay there in a V shape, her shoulders, chest on one table and her thighs upon the other. They took her to the hospital, paralyzed. She's still in the hospital in a cast now, all these years. Now it just happened that this young lady was a very close personal friend of Mr. Albee, of the Keith Albee Orpheum Circuits of Vaudeville. And in those days, they was playing to 8 million people a day in 8,000 theaters in the United States and Canada. When these acts came in, Mr. Albee said to everyone, go out and ridicule, hold up to sarcasm, this chiropractic thing. Look what it did to my friends. One day I happened to be down. I mention that merely to show you that the net result of that was that 8,000 acts began to ridicule us, hold us up to sarcasm on the stages of 8 million people a day, and our business began to slump all over the country. Telegrams, letters coming in, PJ, do something, save us. Yes, you can make more damn trouble for yourself and then come to Papa to pull you out of the mess. Now, I mention that merely to show that this man might have thought that he wasn't very important. But it was just important enough that he was ruining a profession, sending us all into bankruptcy. That's how important he was as a drunken fool. One day I happened to be down in the Columbia Theater seeing vaudeville, and I happened to notice that every actor on the bill was sick. The singer had a sore throat, the pianist had sore fingers, the acrobats had kinks. Every act was something wrong. And I went to John Lubridge, who was then manager of the theater and a student here in school, and I said, John, get all your acts backstage. I want to see them after the show. They did. I said, I want all you folks to come up here tomorrow morning at my office at 9 o'clock. What for? I'm going to give you adjustments and get you well. Which they did. Then at the end of the week, I said, now, where do you jump? Well, I jump Cedar Rapids. Where do you jump? I jump Minneapolis. Where do you jump? Say Des Moines, St. Louis, Kansas City, and what have you. I said, all right, I'm going to give you a letter to a chiropractor down there, and I'm going to ask him to continue the service that we rendered here at no charge to you. Making a long story short, we had as high as 8,000 of those letters out at one time. Not only to the theatrical profession, but to traveling evangelists and traveling men, anybody that was on the road. The result was what? When these people began to find the value of adjustments, instead of ridiculing us and holding us up to sarcasm, they began to boost us from the stage. And the result is our business began to build better than it was even before. Because before we didn't have that boost. Now we had it. One day I received a letter from Mr. Albee inviting me to come to New York and see him. I did. Had lunch with him for an hour and a half. And he said, what right have you to tell my acts, countermand my orders on the stage? And I said, I haven't. I'm really rendering them a service. I'm really improving your people. And he said, well, I don't like anybody telling them what to do. And I said, Mr. Albee, supposing you had a bad actor or a bad actress on the bill, what would you do with them? He said, I'd fire them. Well, of course you would. You could. But once these chiropractors get a license, it's a license for life. And regardless of what he does, we have no control over it and can't cancel it out. And I said, anyhow, you wouldn't expect me to condemn vaudeville merely because of one bad actor on a bill somewhere. Why condemn a whole industry because of one bad actor? He said, I hadn't thought of that. You're right. I'm condemning chiropractic when I should have condemned the chiropractor. Answered, you're right, Mr. Albert. I carry a gold engraved card Mr. Albert gave me to the NDA house in New York City, where I'm the guest of the hotel and my meals anytime, all the time I want to go. I've never used it. I merely mention this by way of showing you that one man saved the profession. We never know how far-reaching something we may think, say, or do will affect the lives of millions tomorrow. One man was ruining it, another man saved it. Now, who knows how important you are? You may be very important in reaching and stepping up from one man to another. I'm thinking now of O.B. Jones, a man that was cross-eyed, a cowhand from Montana that worked for Senator Clark, United States Senator Clark. He couldn't talk good grammar. He couldn't sign his name. He was what you'd call an ordinary ignoramus. But he worked for Senator Clark. When he went back to Montana, he adjusted Senator Clark. Senator Clark went back to the United States Senate in Washington and spread the good work to thousands of people in Washingtonian life. So O.B. Jones was a very important man. He may not have thought so, but he proved that he was. Don't underestimate the importance of yourself in what you may do someday that will affect the lives of millions tomorrow. Now, what is it that awakens people? Are you today so steeped and saturated with billions of medical theories that everything chiropractic mentally looks bilious? We keep on keeping on, plodding and working, hoping we can raise the percentage of one and lower the percentage of our failures. But each year a new crop comes in, begin all over again. As Sheila Teller told me later, I had to be either all or nothing, one or the other. I couldn't crossbreed part of one in part of the other. And that was what had me muddled and confused. I wonder how many of you are in that same state of mind. If you are, you have my sympathy. There's no reason you should be, because Innate will save you if you only know it. You'll let Innate come through. Now, what does this preamble lead up to? Let us ask you some pertinent and salient questions. Are you satisfied with your present income? Would you like to increase that income? Have you dreamed daydreams, or are they nightmares of wanting to do this or that, and couldn't because of this block or that constriction, mainly finance? Are you satisfied with your present earnings of getting sick people well? Would you like to step up your percentage of successes and step down your percentage of failures? You don't know how. Are you convinced that if you had more equipment, you could be a better chiropractor? Would you like to see the chiropractic principle and practice scrapped into a conglomerated hash of a little of everything else? You know, hash is not made. It accumulates in the icebox. Do you want to see chiropractic kept a separate and distinct profession? Would you like to see chiropractic a universal service in every home, in all states, in all countries? Do you think the world of people would be better off if such were true? Would you like to see the chiropractic defined and confined to its original, unlimited, broad concepts as a 10-fingered, by hand-only adjustment of vertebral subluxation only. Would you like to see all the chiropractic schools, nothing but all chiropractic schools? Do you believe that the sick of tomorrow have just as much right to get well as the sick of today? Would you like to see our chiropractic principle and practice absorbed and emasculated as physical neuropathic therapy by medical colleges? Would you like to see all basic science bills and boards abolished? These and many more questions could be asked. All can be answered and can be an actual working reality. Let the other fellow now submit a factual and practical working plan that can work, will work, as he has worked it in past and present years. If you will now become a unit in an international movement that can and will bring it about. We have just about reached the end of one era in our period of time. The man of vision is the man that sees when he comes to the end of one rope and must begin hanging on to another rope, a newer, better, and larger rope. There comes times in the lives of every man when he must step out of one pair of shoes into another, must cease thinking the old order of things and think the new order of things. That time has now arrived. Now let us look over the field. I ask you frankly, is chiropractic on the growth or on the decay? It's going downhill and going down rapidly. Nebraska hasn't had one chiropractor enter its state bounds within 30 years. The older men are dying off. Some are retired. In 10 years, there won't be one chiropractor in the state of Nebraska. I could go down state after state. What's doing it? Not necessarily the character of the legislation in itself, but state boards, politically appointed, that are making arbitrary and empirical rulings that are crowding out our profession. They want the state all to themselves with a fence all around it. The fewer, the greater. That's happening in state after state. And if the state board doesn't do it, then they allow mixing of all kinds to weaken and dilute the chiropractic principle. Basic science bills are nothing more or less than screening bills under the control of medical men of state universities, where they screen us out before we can get to the chiropractic board. They're screening us right and left. 21 states now screening us. The end of legislation has come to a pass. No more can we look to the safety of legislation with its license to protect our profession. No longer can we look to the earnestness and sincerity and honesty of purpose and motives of state boards to protect chiropractic, because they're not doing it anymore. That period is passing. But there is another new sun coming up over the horizon. A period wherein the people themselves must fight for their rights to get well. Remember, they have just as much right to fight to save their lives as you have a right to fight to give them the right to save their lives. You are too prone to overlook their rights in this whole equation. Let me ask you this question. If every sick person in the world knew what you and I know about chiropractic, what do you think they would do? If every sick person in the world knew what chiropractic did to get the sick well, what do you think they would do? If every sick person in the world knew what we're doing in this private clinic of ours, what do you think they would do? Would there be dozens at that front door, or would there be thousands jamming in that front door? Is it your conception that every subluxation in the world has been adjusted? Certainly not. The people want to get well. The people have a right to get well. And the people can rise up in that right and fight for that right to get well. Now, what do you think would happen if we had 5,000 chiropractors, each of them having an auxiliary unit of their own, with 100, 200, 300 patients organized, fighting for their rights to have their lives saved? I was going through Yellowstone Park once on a continent. I sat up on the top front seat of the driver, and they had one of those long bull whips, and he could get any one of those horses any place he wanted with that cracker at the end. We was driving along, and I saw a hornet's nest hanging off a tree. And I said, "Cut that hornet's nest up there." And he said, "I will not by a damn sight." I said, "Why not?" He said, "They're organized." Between lecture trips, I stopped off at a town in Arizona. I had several hours, and I went up and walked through the grounds of the insane asylum. And there was a woman intern walking 12 insane men around the grounds. I went up to her and I said, "I beg your pardon. I've just been wondering what you would do if those 12 men get their heads together and decide to run away. What would you do?" She looked at me a moment and said, "How long have you been in?" I said, "I've never been in. I'm not an inmate. I'm just a visitor here." "Well," she said, "you ought to be in." I said, "How do you figure that?" I said, "How do you figure that?" Well, she said, "When any man will propose that 12 insane men can get their heads together and do one thing, that man is insane." Think what it would mean. I have addressed as high as 8,000 people as a result of one lay unit in New York City alone, paying $1 a head to hear me. 8,000 people. Think of it. Think what it would mean if every chiropractor in this tent was to go home tonight and build an organized unit of their sick folks. Everyone would become a booster, because you would hold your weekly or monthly meetings and you would educate him to a point to where he would go out and drag in 10 for the one that he is. You would build your business way, way, way beyond any conception now. The biggest thing in the world is to organize our patients into a great army. The senator will realize the power of people's votes, the power of public opinion. No one's going to realize more than all of us will that have watched television in the Republican and Democratic conventions the tremendous impact and bombardment of television on the public minds. And I look to see the heaviest vote in the history of the United States this fall because of that impact upon public opinion. Now think what we can do if we were organized. And we can be organized. And by the gods, we're going to be organized. The new era is upon us. We're now facing it. It's that or oblivion for us. I'm prophetically warning you that unless we take hold of this movement this year and put it through, we are headed for disaster. And I'm not pessimistic, I'm just looking facts barely in the face. You're going to hear from us in the next few weeks in an organized plan of putting this work over. And when you get that organized plan, don't you lose any time sending in for your charter, and don't you lose any time building your organization in your town, or by the gods, I'll come out there and shoot you. Let me give you two examples. This spring, I was invited over to Newark, New Jersey, to speak to a lay group, a lay organization, on lay people, patients. And there in that room was jammed 1,000 people, lined up against the wall, packed in up in the galleries. I talked to them about chiropractic, touching upon the legislation that was then pending in the New Jersey legislature. A little later on, the bill passed the House. Then came the fatal day, the last day of the session, and the bill hadn't come up in the Senate. That morning at 9 o'clock, 1,000 lay people went up in the galleries of that Senate at 9 o'clock in the morning and stayed there until 12:10 that night. At 12 o'clock, the bill hadn't come out. They started a stampede. And they had to bring the Senate bill out on the floor before they adjourned sine die that night. They had to have 31 votes to put it over. They had 28, and then 29, and then 30, and midnight came. And they almost had to adjourn. When that audience of 1,000 people started to cry, one more vote, one more vote, one more vote, and the 31st vote came through. That's the effect of lay people, not the chiropractors. You can get anything that you want, that's right, that's constructive, that's helpful, from the people, if you'll organize them into action. The governor of Israel later vetoed that bill. But nevertheless, we got it through the Senate. Now comes one of the most thrilling stories I've ever known in this legislative game. And I know them from coast to coast and border to border because I've fought in many of them. Down in South Australia, because if I was Euclideans, I would say Australia, but having been in Australia, I know it's Australia. In South Australia, there are 3 chiropractors. Only 3. In 1945, they started to get legislation. They didn't get it until 1952. Meanwhile, 1,000 lay people down there said to the 3 chiropractors, you step aside. You get out of this picture. This is not your fight. This is our fight. We're fighting for the right to save our lives. We're fighting for the right to save the lives of our children. We're fighting to prolong our lives. This isn't your battle, it's our battle. And they organized themselves, 1,000 people strong. In 1945, they fought that down through year after year, never compromising on anything. They knew, the people knew what they wanted, even though chiropractors don't. They knew what they wanted, and they fought for it, and they stuck to it year after year until they got what they wanted in 1952. I want to read you that bill. Coming from the lay people, it's a very sensible bill. If it had come from chiropractors, Lord only knows how many hours it would have taken me to read it. But this won't take long. Being enacted by the governor of the state of South Australia, with the advice and consent of the Parliament thereof, as follows. 1. This act may be cited as the Chiropractic Act 1949. In this act, unless inconsistent with the context or subject matter, chiropractic means the system of palpating and adjusting the articulations of the human spinal column by hand only for the relief of nerve pressure. Chiropractor means any person whose method of attention to the human body is confined solely to chiropractic. Third, notwithstanding any provisions of the Physiotherapist Act 4548 or the Medical Practitioners Act 1946, a chiropractor may practice chiropractic without being registered under either of those acts. 4. A person practicing as a chiropractor under this act may, in connection with his practice, use X-rays for the purpose only of producing shadow photographs of the human spinal column. In the name and behalf of His Majesty, I hereby assent to this bill. C.W.M. Norrie, Governor. Simple, wasn't it? That is the most inclusive, exclusive, and conclusive bill that was ever passed anywhere, and it wasn't passed by chiropractors. It was passed by an organized group of lay people. About a month ago, I received the manuscript of that fight, play by play, year by year, as written by Mr. Milne, the president of the Layman's Organization. It came to me one day. I glanced it over, and suddenly I was thrilled with it. Then I began to read it minutely. I read it practically all one night. And the next morning early, I phoned Chicago, and I said, "Get down here quick. I've got a book I want published." Mr. Van Orman of the County Company came down the next morning. I said, "Here's a book I must have out by Lyceum." So here's the book, Forgotten Freedom, costing us $1.78 a copy, selling them to you at $2. I want there's only 1,000 copies printed too. I want every one of you to get a copy down in the store, and when you get home, I want you to read it. You'll be thrilled to see how these lay people organized and fought to save chiropractic in South Australia so they could save their own lives. That's what we're up against. Lay people. They've got more common sense than our own profession has. Our own profession seems to be so immersed in greed for dollars that they've lost sight of the right of the sick people to get well. It's time there's a reversal of that. If we don't, when this generation's gone, chiropractic will be in the hands of the medical men. And it'll be there as a bastard practice rather than a pure one. It comes as a question of motives. I'm not interested in seeing you get rich. I'm not particularly interested in seeing you buy cars and horses and horses and all that kind. But I am interested in wanting to see the sick people get well. That was originally in concept of my father. It's been my concept all my life. And it always will be. It should be your motive. Now, when this program comes to you, which it will in a few weeks, I want you to jump in there and help us organize the United States in putting over this great work, because it's really worthwhile. Next Lyceum, I want to see not less than 1,000 lay organizations at work into one national organization under the controlling interests of the ICA, because the ICA is sponsoring this work. Now, I don't mind telling you frankly, if I have anything to do with the question of policies of the ICA and this layman's organization, the ICA shall keep a strong, stiff, hard hand on the question of policy to keep it from getting out of hand, anti-chiropractic and pro-medical. Now, maybe that's a harsh statement to make, but somebody's got to keep this profession in line. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I think I can. Now, there's somewhere in all of us, you know, Father Flanagan once said of Boys Town, there isn't such a thing as a bad boy. There isn't such a thing as a bad chiropractor, because after all, chiropractors are just grown-up little boys. They're not bad. It's just that they've got twisted and warped a little somewhere. But in and behind every one of us, and I repeat in another way what I said last night, in and behind every one of us is a great innate intelligence that we were born with. That innate is always right, always constructive, always helpful, always sane, always normal, always natural. It's only the surface of you that goes haywire. It's only your education that's warped. Now, if you can just let that innate get through, innate will tell you that the great service you can render to the world is to help sick people get well and help them to preserve that right for the people of tomorrow as well as today. And if you let that innate come through, next year you'll be one of the biggest chiropractors and the biggest gatherings of chiropractors we ever had here. Let that innate come through. You will be a great credit to us. And you will catch the motive that I've always lived for, always helped to bring about. Now, as I say, I'm going to close with this thought. In a few weeks, we will send you literature telling you what to do. Catch the great vision. You'll be surprised. You know, there's two things that actuates people into motion, into action. One is the fear of losing what he's got. The other is the greed to get more of what he has. Now, let me tell you very frankly, the medical men are squeezing us on all sides. They're squeezing us with basic science bills and basic science boards. Chiropractic boards are squeezing us on all sides. Legislation is being amended and squeezing us further. It's only a question of time till the medical monopoly, that great big giant that way, only 17 years old, and we have built $1 million clinic, the largest, the finest, the greatest, the most accomplishment of any research clinic in the world, irrespective of character. And we've done it over in 17 years. Why? How? Through education of the masses. Organizing them into recall. Doing the very thing that I'm suggesting you should be doing, should have done years in gone by. Wednesday afternoon as a picnic. Or I may give it Wednesday evening, because I have another talk scheduled for tomorrow night. What's your pleasure? Do you want to have something else?